In this video, I'm going to show you how to establish communication between your vinyl cutter, your Windows operating system, and the StoneCut family of software. So what you see on the screen here is StoneCut 3 Plus. There's three versions of StoneCut. There's the basic version, the Plus version, and the Pro version. And in terms of establishing communication, it works exactly the same way. So I've opened up the StoneCut 3 Plus software. Here's my working area. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull an image into the software so we can do a test cut. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to navigate over here to the Docker on the right. I'm going to select Clip Art. I'm going to go to the drop-down list. I'm going to select Smart Cuts. And I'm just going to simply drag and drop this hibiscus image onto my screen. And if I hit F4, I can zoom in on it. If I look over here on my property bar, I can see it's 3.5 inches wide. That's a really good size in order to do a test cut. Also, this image has quite a few angles in it, so it'll give it a real good indication of how the material is going to weed. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to get our cutter set up. And I would recommend one of two materials to load into the cutter, either a Thermoflex heat transfer material or an intermediate sign vinyl. Both of those materials would be ideal for a test cut. They're relatively inexpensive, and also they're easy to cut, and they're going to cut at a fairly low pressure. I'm going to suggest that you load a 45-degree blade into your blade holder, get that fitted into the cutter, and then consult your manual for your cutter to get the material loaded. So what we need to do at this point, the material needs to be loaded into the cutter, the blade holder position needs to be positioned ready to cut, and the machine needs to be online. Just like it's ready to cut, machine absolutely has to be online in order to establish communication. So if you've never cut before in the StoneCut software, if you go over here and click on the little cutter icon or hit S on your keyboard, it's going to pop up the window that allows us to establish communication. The other way to do that is just by going to Settings, selecting Standard Settings, and then clicking on Output Devices. So let's do that one more time. Settings, Standard Settings, and Output Devices. So when the Setup Output Devices window comes up, you'll clearly see a drop-down list, and you can see that I already have a GCC Puma 460 cutter in my drop-down list. That's the only cutter I have established. But what I want to do is I want to add another machine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to the box with the three little buttons right here. I'm going to hit Add Local Device. So Add Local Device. Once that comes up, I need to select my device from the drop-down list. And there's over 600 different vinyl cutters that are in the actual software. So if I go over to the drop-down list, you can start to see all the different models. Also, you'll notice that there's also a universal driver in here. So there's a universal driver. Sometimes when we run into machines that are, kind of off-brand machines, some of the Chinese machines and things of that nature, we can get the machine to cut with the universal driver. So here's the universal drivers right in here. And normally I would start off with this basic one right here, HPGL 0.01. So if I'm establishing with a more typical vinyl cutter, establishing communication with a common brand, what I would do is just go to that brand, and I could go down here and select a GCC cutter or a Graphtec, Mamaki, Roland, all the popular cutter manufacturers. So we're going to set up a GCC cutter right here, and so I'm just going to scroll down to GCC. I'm going to look physically on my cutter to see what the model is, and let's see here, we're going to go to a Jaguar 5, and the Jaguar 5 right here, the number right after Jaguar is going to be the width of the machine. So the machine, the most common width is the 61, which is the 24-inch machine. So I'm going to select GCC Jaguar 5 61. And then something that's very, very important, I need to have my cutter online. We talked about that before. If the cutter is not online, it will not recognize. So right now, I don't have a cutter connected. So if I go over here and go to USB Firewire right here, and I select that, and I go down to the drop-down list, it's not going to say USB printing support. What we want to do is make sure the cutter is online, the drivers for the cutter are installed, and then once we do that, it'll say USB printing support. Now in the case of a GCC cutter, we don't have to install any drivers. And something that's very important, you need to consult the manual for your cutter manufacturer to see if in Windows 10 you need to install drivers. Some of the older operating systems, you do need to install drivers. In Windows 10, typically you don't need to install drivers, but you need to consult your manual for your cutter manufacturer to determine that if you need to install any type of driver in order for the cutter to communicate with Windows 10. So in the case of a GCC cutter, we don't need to do that. We just have the machine set up, it's online, it's ready to cut. If we go over here to USB FireWire and we see USB printing support, we would select that, and that's going to establish communication with the cutter. So once that's all done, what we would do is click on the OK button, and then what we would do is we'd click on Apply. So let's go ahead and add that driver real quick again. I'm going to say Add Local Device. We're going to go down here, select GCC, and I'm going to pick my device from the list. Go back down here to Jaguar 5, select USB printing support, click on OK, and once we get to this window, all we're going to do is click Apply. That's it. Click Apply, click OK, and now we've established that driver. Now, bear in mind, you can add multiple devices. So if you have different vinyl cutters, you can add a driver for each vinyl cutter that you have, and you can actually, in the software, select the machine where that particular job is going to go. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to walk through basic test cut, and I'm going to show you how to set up material preferences in the software. So if I'm going to cut this image, what I need to do is I need to click on the cut icon, or I can just hit S. So it looks like a little image of a cutter. Now, if an object is selected, what is selected will cut. If nothing is selected, everything in the graphic is going to cut. So if I want to cut just this object, I could just simply select it right here with my selection tool and click on the little cutter icon. Now what I'm seeing is the output to device window. And what you're going to see in the drop-down list is any cutters that you've set up in terms of their drivers. So if you've set up a cutter driver, they're going to show up in your list here. So I'm going to select Jaguar 5 61. And then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up material presets for the different materials. And so with our cutter setup guide, you have a list of different materials, and you can actually enter those in as profiles. So let's go ahead and see if I have any profiles already entered in there. I'm going to go to Output Profile. I'm going to go to my drop-down list. And I already have some profiles from a previous installation that are there. But I'm going to add a new profile. And the profile I'm going to add is Thermoflex. So I'm going to come over here to Pressure, and I'm going to put a value for Thermoflex. I'm going to put a value of 85. We're going to start out with 85. And you'll notice we also have a value for speed. In the case of a Jaguar 5, if I put in 200 here and hit enter, we're going to get a message that says, hey, the highest speed you can cut on that machine is 153. So, and that's true of most cutters. It'll give us a more or less a speed limit. So I'm going to put in 153. If I was doing a Puma 3 or if I was doing a Puma 4, my max value there would be 60. For material width, I can enter a material width, but if the cutter is online and it's communicating with the software, I could just simply click on Read Material, and it would pull the machine and return a width value, and in some cases even a length value. So if you had your machine read the sheet size, it would return both the material width and length. So we're going to go ahead and leave that there. And then I'm going to go over here and go to Manage Profiles, and I'm going to click on Add. I'm going to put the word Thermoflex, just going to type that in there. We're going to put that listing in, Thermoflex. We're going to click on OK. So there's a preset. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another preset, and we're going to go down and add a preset for Glitterflex. So you notice I have Glitterflex. It's already in there. I'm going to update that. So if I came down here, I could go over here and enter a new value. Let's say we were cutting Thermoflex and it was cutting through to the liner sheet and we wanted to reduce the pressure because we have a very sharp blade. I can just go down here and type in 115 for 115 and then just say Save Profile, and it'll update that value. So you notice you can shuttle between different materials just by going to the drop-down list. Now something that's important, if you're a GraphicsTech user, your pressure is going to be displayed in a different value. So in a GraphicsTech, if you see a setting of 12, that's actually 120 grams. So they just drop off the last digit. So right now you can clearly see we have 85 grams of pressure. Our speed is set to 153, and we're ready to cut. We normally read material, so we make sure that the graphic will fit onto the material. Now there is some settings in this window that we need to take a look at. One of the settings is weed border distance. A weed border is a box that goes around the perimeter of the graphic. I usually like to increase this to about 0.2 or 0.25 inches, so we'll click on Save Settings there. I'm going to leave all these settings alone here, but two settings that are very important: sort before output and always preferred job order. We're going to leave those checked. And what sort before output will do is we'll sort the objects in the graphic so they cut in an orderly fashion from bottom right to upper left. That will increase your cutting speed. It'll make your cutter track better, and then objects will align better if there's multiple objects in a design and you have, say, two colors and you need it to align, graphics on top of each other. So it's very important to have sort before output. As long as that button is checked, we're going to get sorted cutting order by default. I don't have to do anything else to do that. Just simply check that button. In terms of what we're cutting all objects. If we had a multicolor design, we could select just the color we want to cut. So we're going to cut all objects. I'm going to go over here and click on Preview. We're going to get a preview of the graphic. If I was going to cut a whole bunch of these, what I would do is I would go in and do what's called multi-copy. Now, if this was a heat transfer, I would want to hit Y on my keyboard to mirror it. And if I hit A, it's going to rotate it. So see how we're rotating it? So Y to mirror, A to rotate. So I'm going to go over here to my multi-copy button. I'm going to go over here and tell it how many I want. So let's say I want to click on 20. And then what I can do is I can say optimize material optimization. Here's my weed border distance between each object. I can say from working area, and it'll optimize the material for that working area. Rotation of object is required. Click on OK, and it's automatically going to optimize my material. And what I can also do is I can click on these borders, and I can drag a border in here, and we can divide this into sections when we go to cut it. And even if it's sitting over the graphic, it's going to skip. So don't worry about it if it's sitting over the graphic. So that'd be a typical setup. Now I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that on my graphic, and I'm going to get rid of these borders. So I'm just going to drag those off the page. And all we really want to do is a test cut at this point. So in order to do a test cut, we're simply going to go over here to Output, click on the Output button. It'll send it to the cutter. If communication is established, the cutter will move and you'll see it cut. And then next thing you want to do is you want to advance the material out of your cutter. You want to grab your weeding tool. You want to try to weed out that perimeter weed border. And we want to make sure that material is weeding properly. We don't want the blade cutting or etching into the liner sheet. Also, we don't want it cutting straight through the liner sheet. If the blade is not cutting through the material, more than likely the blade isn't out too far, or possibly your blade is damaged or dull. So what I would normally do is move the blade out just a little bit, maybe like a quarter turn, just to move the blade out and do another test cut to see what's going on. But the main thing is we just want to establish communication. You can dial in the materials by adjusting different pressures and different blade depths to get your material fine-tuned. But the main thing we wanted to do here is just establish communication between the cutter and the StoneCut software.